Okay, so in this chapter, we're going to look at how we coordinate different parts of speech. This is where we're going to tap into that conjunction function memory that I know you all have somewhere in your brain. And while the chapter technically brings up subordination at the end, it's really not worth dealing with right now because we're going to look at that much more in depth in chapters 5 and 6. All right, so one reason it is important to understand sentence patterns, which we covered in the second lecture or chapter, is that it will help us able to understand when we're talking about coordination and subordination, we're talking about coordinating specific parts of a sentence. So whether it is the subject, the verb, the object, complement, etc., any part of a sentence can be coordinated or subordinated, but only with that same part. So it helps us isolate where coordination or subordination is happening. So to coordinate just means to put things into parallel with one another such that one is not more important than the other. And when a part of a sentence is coordinated, then all of it counts as that part of the sentence. All right, so let's take this first example. He and she are or were on their way, but not here. Yeah, it's kind of an awkward sentence, actually. The subject of the sentence is he and she, both of them together. It's not he, it's not she, it's that phrase. The verb is are or were, and the adverbial is on their way, but not here yet. So that is a sentence one, pattern one type of sentence. Now, everything coordinated counts equally. So let's look at the second example, which is a pattern 7 type of sentence. The mother of the bride, the wedding planner, the bride, and the bridesmaid made the wedding ceremony, and the reception not only very moving, but also very fun. Here the subject is the mother of the bride, the wedding planner, the bride, and the bridesmaids. The direct object is the wedding ceremony and the reception, and the object complement is not only very moving, but also very fun. Only and also are adverbs, and we'll be talking about those in a second. So now, here is where grammar and style start to come into play. Grammatically, technically, you can have the coordinated elements of a sentence be of different types, but it will sound awkward. So look at the example here. I love movies, riding bikes, video games, playing basketball, and whatever my friends love. Now, technically, all that works. You wouldn't count that as grammatically incorrect, but it does sound a little weird, and it's certainly not as smooth as the other example. I love movies, bikes, video games, basketball, and my friends. That's because in the first example, each coordinated item, well, not each one, but there are different types of coordinated items in that list. You have nouns, verb phrases, and even a clause at the end. While in the second example, all the coordinated items are nouns. And so when you coordinate, you generally want to keep the same type of grammatical item or feature in each one of the coordinated parts to make it sound more smooth. So here's an example of an effective use of coordination. This is the famous essay by David Foster Wallace about his experience on a Caribbean cruise that he wrote for Harper's Magazines. Now, in these opening paragraphs, Wallace is trying to communicate the sheer excess of a cruise ship and does that by repeating the same sentence structure, I have, over and over. So while the sentences are not technically coordinated, they're each their own independent clause, they have the same effect of coordination, which is to create a sense of a list. Sometimes he does use grammatical coordination, however, to great effect. He writes, and this is kind of in this part right here, I have heard steel drums and eaten conch fritters and watched a woman in silver lame projectile vomit inside a glass elevator. And notice that here we have 3 verb phrases coordinated together, 3 items that are nonetheless unrelated. And that creates a certain disorientation in the reader because steel drums and conch fritters and a woman in an elevator aren't exactly the type of thing that you see in sequence, right? That disorientation fits in nicely with the last item in the list about vomiting. Now, the key punctuation when coordinating is the comma, of course, and you probably learned this way back in 1st or 2nd grade, that you separate items in a list, which is a coordinated set, with a comma. The comma is used to coordinate each item in a list as well as to coordinate entire sentences. So that if you want to put 2 sentences together, you need that coordinating punctuation. The key is that you should never put commas between parts of sentences. So you'll never use a comma to split the subject and the verb, or the verb and the direct object. We covered that a little bit when we looked at punctuation in chapter 2, but I knew we were going to talk about it later, so I kind of punted on it. Let's look at this example. Our classroom is down the hall, on the left, across from the bathrooms, and ready when you are. And it will begin at 9:30 sharp. So in the first part of the sentence, I am coordinating 4 different types of adverbials in a sentence 1 type of pattern. And then I'm coordinating that entire sentence with the sentence, it will begin at 9:30 sharp. Now, to coordinate different items, you can only use one of the following 7 coordinating conjunctions. This includes the famous and, or, but, and nor, but it also includes for, yet, and so. These conjunctions conveniently form the acronym FANBOYS. If you ever want to coordinate 2 sentences together, you must use one of these and only one of these, along with, of course, a comma. Now, when you fail to use a coordinated conjunction to coordinate 2 sentences, we call that a comma splice. When you coordinate a sentence with a comma, but without a coordinated conjunction, oops, let me pause for a second. Okay, let me get back to it. When I prepare these lectures, I try to prepare some type of script to kind of help keep me focused and moving efficiently. And I realized as I was going through it that I had a slight problem that I wanted to fix. All right, so, oops, I jumped ahead. Going back to here. So when we talk about coordinating 2 sentences, if you fail to use a coordinating conjunction, you just have the comma. We call that a comma splice. When you have a coordinated conjunction but fail to use a comma, we call that a fuse sentence or a run-on sentence. Now, run-on sentences have nothing to do with sentences being long. You'll often see students say the sentence is really wordy, or it's a run-on sentence, when really they just mean I got tired reading that sentence. That does not mean it's grammatically incorrect. It's really about whether they have combined sentences properly. And so just remember, you always need a conjunction, one of the FANBOYS conjunctions, as well as a comma. Okay, so now along with coordinated conjunctions, we also have correlative conjunctions. And these are conjunctions that always form a coordinated pair, and they create a special emphasis. They can only be used for lists of 2, and if you use the first one, you must use the other one. They just come in pairs. They're married, as it were. If you use both to start a 2-part list, you must use and. Just like if you use neither, you must complete it with nor. But you do not have to use neither nor either every time you use nor or. Does that make sense? The not only but also is perhaps the most unique of these correlative pairs, because each part of the correlative conjunction takes a 2-word phrase. Now, this is a pair that people are likely to set off with a comma, I think because they tend to come in sentences that are a little bit long, or excuse me, in pairs that are a little bit long. But technically, it does not take one any more than the others do. This is why the first example, we not only study grammar, comma, but also learn about prose style, is incorrect. In example 2, you're coordinating verbs, phrases, study grammar, and learn about prose style, and so you're on good footing. We not only study grammar, but also learn about prose style. So because there's no comma, it is correct. And in sentence 3, it works because we're actually coordinating 2 sentences. Not only do we study grammar, but also we learn about prose style. So we is used, and that means we have 2 separate subjects. Even if they are the same subject, they're separated. And then study and learn are the separate tense verbs. Now, all this coordination stuff is pretty simple. That's why I've kind of moved pretty quickly through it until we get to the subject-verb agreements. And this is where things get a little bit tricky. That's because coordination, as I said earlier, makes every item involved equal, and that includes coordinated subjects. But when we are trying to figure out how to tense our verbs, we need to know if the subject is singular or plural. So we have to know what effect different conjunctions have on determining whether coordinated subjects are singular or plural. Now, and is probably pretty straightforward because it combines things. So even if you have 2 single items, they are going to instantly become a plural item. So anytime you use and to coordinate something, you know you have a plural. So the apple is ripe would be fine, but if you make it both the apple and the banana, then you have to say they are ripe. Now, or and nor, however, do not combine. They coordinate single items while keeping them singular. In that case, if you are coordinating 2 separate singular items, you will not make it plural. the apple or the banana is fine with me. Neither the banana nor the apple is ripe. And that might sound a little bit off because in your mind you're thinking, I have an apple and I have a banana, but you're not saying that in the sentence. You're actually saying you have either an apple or a banana, not both. So you keep it singular. Okay, so that's probably pretty simple. That's clear enough when you're dealing with singular nouns, but what happens when you have two parts and one of them is singular and one of them is plural? Well, again, if you're using and, that's easy because everything becomes plural when you use and. But if you're using or nor, then you're not combining. So then you have a singular on the one hand and a plural on the other. Which one do you base the verb off of? You technically just tense the verb based on the closest one. So you would say either the governor or his cabinet members decide on the meeting's agenda. And we are simply making decide plural because his cabinet members is the closest one. If we flip the sentence and said his cabinet members or the governor decides on the meeting's agenda, I had to pause there for a second, then you would make that verb singular because the governor would be closest to the verb. So when you're using or, that's how you coordinate them. Another time people get tripped up is when they use parentheticals. Parentheticals are simply brief asides or comments within a sentence, and they will be set off with commas. That's how we know that they are not actually a fundamental part of the sentence. We'll actually kind of see some of those when we talk about adverbials. And it's easy to think that these are coordinated parts and that they act like coordination, but it's important to know that they are not and that they should not be treated as such. For that reason, the verb is not tense any differently when you have a parenthetical. So in the example, he, along with the other students, wants to go out to recess. You might think, oh, that sounds weird because the other students wants, we know that's off, but the subject here is just he. The other students are not part of the grammatical subject. They might feel like they're part of the subject, but technically, grammatically, they are not. And if you find that sentence awkward, then you should probably rewrite your sentence. That phrase, along with the other students, is just a parenthetical optional prepositional phrase. That's why it's set off with commas. It shows that it's actually not a integral part of the sentence part. Now, the same goes for the second example. The dishes, not the dining room table, were a mess. Not the dining room table is not part of the subject or verb or subject complement or anything like that. So because it's optional, it does not change the tense of the verb. Note too that not is not a coordinating conjunction. It is actually, in fact, an adverb. And just as a parenthetical aside myself, not is actually a really strange word. I really encourage you to go read about it in the dictionary because it's going to kind of make you think like, how do we use the word not? And what exactly is this function in a sentence? This is kind of a strange word that kind of flips a lot of things. Anyways, let's look at a couple of the exercises. So I'm going to have you do 1, 3, and 5 on your own. So for exercise 13, I'm just going to do 2 and 4 with you. The instructions say, choose the verb that agrees in number and in person with the subject. If a compound subject is joined by either or neither nor, the verb should agree with the closer member, kind of giving away the trick there. Either the students or the instructor choose a site in the region to explore. We have to pick which one. So we are going to notice first off, that we have, here we go, here's my marker, an either or, so we are not combining. So we got to decide on the closest one, which is the instructor, and the singular form is chooses. A lunch along with plenty of water is or are essential for the trip. This is just a parenthetical. You can just pretend like it's not there. This is your subject. A lunch is essential for the trip. So that's how we decide. Okay, let me erase what I got. Doing the same thing or similar, but this time with exercise 14. Add punctuation to the following passages if necessary. In some cases, there may be more than one possibility. So it's trying to make sure that we know how to punctuate coordinated sentences or coordinated parts. Let's look at number 2. You're going to do 1, 3, 5, 7 on your own. Most of the museums are located on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., but the National Air and Space Museum has 2 locations. So I have a coordinating conjunction right here, and I have two separate independent clauses. So I need my comma after DC. And yeah, that's the only coordination that I have. Okay. Number 4, the National Air and Space Museum on the National Mall contains in its collection the Wright Flyer, Sputnik 1, and the Apollo 11 lunar module. Now, it's a little bit confusing because you have to kind of know where the proper nouns or the names end. The Wright Flyer is one, Sputnik 1 is another, and the Apollo 11 lunar module. It's actually a great museum. If you haven't gone there, you should definitely go there. I don't remember seeing the Apollo 11 lunar module. We had a lot of kids. I was with my sister and her family, and they have a lot of little kids. So I don't remember much about that trip, but it was pretty cool. 6, visitors to the Stephen F. Hudvar Hazy Center can view the Boeing B-29 Super Fortress Enola Gay, the McCready Gossamer Albatross, and the Space Shuttle Enterprise. Again, we kind of have to know where these all end. I don't even know that I know all of these. Boeing B-29, I think. Super Fortress, Enola Gay, that dropped the atomic bomb. McCready, Gossamer Albatross, and the Space Shuttle Enterprise. Yeah, that's kind of a strange example. Don't know if I like that one. Number 8, these museums share the same mission. They are dedicated to the commemoration of the nation's aeronautic history. So here we have what we call a fuse sentence or a run-on sentence. This is when we have brought together two independent clauses, but we haven't punctuated them correctly. It's not a comma splice because we don't even have a comma. If they had done a comma, where did my marker go? Right here, it would have been a comma splice. But how do we want to punctuate this? Well, I haven't talked about it much in these lessons because we're going to talk about it in our punctuation lessons, but we could use a semicolon or a colon here. I think a colon is more stylistically appropriate because the opening independent clause suggests it's going to reveal what the same mission is, and that's what this independent clause does. It says they are dedicated to the commemoration of the nation's aeronautic history. So I think the colon makes a nice reveal moment. Semicolons are more for putting together two things that are related, but not directly linked, whereas colons are more about almost sort of a step 1 to step 2 type of feel. Okay. Go ahead and take away my commas. All right. Now, I want to make a brief point about material that was not covered in the textbook but is relevant to our discussion here. So the biggest problem students have with coordination is not that they don't know how to use and, or, but, or. They're pretty good about that. It is that they think that other types of conjunctions count as coordination and their grammar gets really confused. So I want to bring up one of those other types of conjunctions. We call this the conjunctive adverb. We're going to talk about these more when we talk about adverbials, actually in the very next chapter, but I want to flag it for right now. So conjunctive adverbs are what are called sentence adverbs because they can modify an entire sentence. They modify the sense or mood of the whole thing. We call them conjunctive, though, because they connect the ideas of the previous sentence with the current one. So they do not combine sentences the way a coordinating conjunction would. Rather, they suggest something like a logical connection between the two. I sometimes call these turn signals when I teach writing because it helps us understand that you are signaling to the reader where you came from and where you are going in this new sentence. Now, they're usually set off by commas, and because they modify the entire sentence, they can really go anywhere within that sentence, even between parts of a sentence, like between the subject and the verb. They're very flexible that way. But it's also why students tend to get them mixed up. They're usually one word, but they can also be an entire phrase. So here are some of the most common examples. You have accordingly, also, besides, indeed, in other words, however, moreover, then, subsequently, still. And notice that some of these are adverbs on their own right and can function as adverbs separately, not necessarily as conjunctive adverbs. But these are some of the more common conjunctive adverbs that we use. Notice also that some of them indicate different types of logical relationships between ideas. Some indicate contrast, like however. Some indicate comparison, like I guess Nothing's really coming to mind. Conversely, I guess. Some indicate sequence, also, moreover, furthermore, and some indicate conclusion, thus, therefore, subsequently, et cetera, et cetera. Now, here's the main reason I want to bring this up, okay? You see this word here, however, this is by far, and it's not even close, the most misused word I see from students, and probably the biggest grammatical error that I see all the time. In fact, it's becoming so common that it's almost one of these things that might become part of our language, but I'm still kind of hoping that it doesn't. I'll explain why. Here's the problem with this. However is a conjunctive adverbs, but people will use it like a coordinating conjunction. And they will try and combine two sentences with however as the link. But please know now that you cannot do this. I repeat, you cannot use however as a coordinating conjunction. And while I am always willing to bend the rules for the sake of style, I really have never come across, nor can I even imagine, and I've tried to imagine it, a stylistic use of however as a coordinating conjunction. It really only confuses the reader. So, got to find another way to combine sentences with an actual coordinating conjunction with a semicolon, or even just create two sentences as I do in some of these examples. Don't use the word however, and I'm going to explain why. Here's the problem. If you try and coordinate two sentences with however, you will likely create a moment of confusion in the reader. It might be momentary, it might be brief, but any small amount of confusion you create in the reader is a bad sign. So let's look at the example at the top, and let's think about the reader's experience here. You read the first sentence. My friends told me that this movie was going to be terrible. Okay, makes sense. Now you start reading sentence number 2. I really enjoyed it, however. Stop right there. Now, the reader is going to think, aha, however, this is indicating that he disagrees with his friend's assessment. It's a sentence adverb, or excuse me, yeah, it's a sentence adverb or conjunctive adverb. I know, Bonnie's really upset about it too. She's really mad about this, however. She's heated. Bonnie, shh. All right, let me finish. So, sentence number 3, though, is going to create the confusion. It was way too long. And so now you're left wondering, wait a minute, is this, however, meant to contrast sentence 1 with sentence 2? Or is it meant to contrast sentence 2 with sentence 3? Because all 3 of these are sent in a series of contrasts, and you don't know what this, however, is doing. Okay, so this is the problem with using however as a coordinating conjunction as it's being used here between 2 and 3, is because we're not clear whether the however applies to the relationship between 1 and 2 or between 2 and 3. Okay, so please don't use however as a coordinating conjunction. Put a semicolon here and then say, however, it was way too long. Something along those lines, but as like this is bad. Don't do bad, okay? So that's, I think, all I have. Thank you for listening to my rant, and I'll see you in class. We will talk about this more.